The wind over Gibraltar carried the smell of salt, stone, and secrets. In 1941, the British colony had become more than a fortress. It was a keyhole through which the fate of the Mediterranean turned. Hitler's armies were sweeping across Europe, and the Axis dreamed of taking the Rock, the gateway to the Atlantic. But buried deep beneath the limestone cliffs, hidden even from most of the soldiers stationed there, a different kind of war was being prepared, one that would continue even after the guns fell silent. The men who built it called it Operation Tracer. Others later would call it the Stay Behind Cave. Lieutenant Colonel Fordham stood at the tunnel mouth as the diesel generator coughed to life, filling the space with low, metallic thunder. The air inside the cave was damp, thick with the smell of limestone dust and oil. 6 men would live here, maybe for years, buried alive beneath the rock, sealed in after a German invasion, with orders to report enemy movements until they starved, suffocated, or went mad. No exit, no rescue, just duty. Dr. Bruce Cooper, a naval surgeon from Yorkshire, stared at the narrow concrete chamber that would become their tomb. 2 bunks, a small galley, a periscope disguised in a natural fissure aimed toward the harbor below. "If they seal us in," he muttered, "the only air we'll breathe is what they leave us." Fordham didn't answer. He simply ran his hand along the cold wall, tracing the shape of a hatch designed to be welded shut from the outside. In the weeks that followed, the team gathered supplies: canned food, morphine, rum, batteries, water filters, notebooks, a single revolver. Everything planned for silence. The cave was to be their grave, and every item had to last until there was nothing left to last for. The radio set, hand-built by naval intelligence, could transmit faint signals through the rock using an experimental antenna system. It would be their only voice to a world that might never answer. The volunteers were chosen with surgical precision: 2 doctors, 3 sailors, 1 engineer. No families, no attachments, men who could vanish quietly if the order came. Cooper asked, "What happens when the food runs out?" Fordham looked him in the eye. "You'll have morphine." There was a pause, then the sound of the generator pulsing deeper into the rock. Outside, the Mediterranean shimmered under a dying sun, oblivious. Above them, barracks filled with thousands of men who knew nothing of the cave beneath their boots. And somewhere in the Admiralty's sealed orders, the plan was written in clean, efficient ink. In the event of Axis occupation, 6 men will be entombed within the Rock of Gibraltar for the duration of the war. Objective: continuous observation of harbor and coastline. Duration: indefinite. That night, when the others had left, Cooper stayed behind in the half-finished chamber, the echo of dripping water his only companion. He wrote in his medical log, the words shaking as he set them down. "They call it a lookout, but it feels more like a burial." The sound of hammering carried through the tunnels, sealing walls, building silence. And in the stillness between blows, Cooper thought he heard something else, the faint, hollow beat of the sea against the stone, like a heartbeat, like the rock itself was alive and waiting. They were summoned without ceremony, each man receiving a sealed envelope marked "Most Secret, Hands Only." Inside, a single sheet: "Report to the Admiralty, London." Further orders classified. No explanation, no destination. Just an instruction to pack for an extended naval assignment. Those who arrived at the underground offices beneath Whitehall found themselves facing men who never gave names. The recruiters spoke quietly, almost reverently, of a mission that would outlast invasion, bombardment, even death itself. "You will not return," one said. "If you succeed, no one will know. If you fail, no one will find you." Among the chosen was Surgeon Lieutenant Bruce Cooper, calm, methodical, the kind of man who measured fear in heartbeats. With him came Lieutenant Tommy Horn, a wiry radio operator with a laugh that never quite reached his eyes, and Petty Officer Wilkes, a miner before the war, who could read stone like a book. The last three were sailors, rough, loyal men from Portsmouth, chosen for their ability to follow orders even when those orders made no sense. None of them yet knew what kind of grave they'd volunteered for. In early December 1941, they arrived in Gibraltar under cover of darkness. The rock loomed above them, vast, black, and alive with soldiers. Beneath its surface, an entire world of tunnels stretched like veins, carved by hand and dynamite. It was there, in one forgotten branch near the south face, that engineers had been hollowing a chamber large enough to house 6 men. The sound of drills echoed like distant thunder. The walls wept moisture, and the air tasted of dust and iron. Commander Fordham greeted them with the restraint of a man already halfway buried. "You've all been selected for your stability," he said, his voice carrying down the damp corridor. "This is not a post for glory. You will not fight. You will observe. And you will endure." He handed each of them a sealed capsule of morphine, for use only when there is no other option. No one asked what he meant. Their training began immediately. Radio discipline, emergency medical procedures, silent movement. They learned to identify ships from the faintest shadow on the horizon, to log coordinates without sound, to calculate enemy bearings by the rhythm of the sea. They were drilled not just in skill, but in restraint. To live quietly, to move softly, to breathe sparingly. Cooper kept notes in a coded medical log, psychological endurance test disguised as duty. When night fell, they gathered inside the incomplete chamber. Candles flickered against the raw rock, casting shadows that seemed to move even when they were still. The engineer, Wilkes, traced the ventilation shaft with his finger and muttered, "We're digging our own coffin." Horn grinned. "At least it's got a good view." But no one laughed. Outside, the world was turning darker. The Japanese had struck at Pearl Harbor. The war was expanding, swallowing oceans and continents. Rumors spread that Hitler would soon move south, through Spain, through Gibraltar, into North Africa. If that happened, the men inside the rock would be sealed in before the first Axis soldier crossed the border. Cooper walked the tunnels late that night, his boots echoing through the emptiness. The rock seemed to breathe around him, exhaling cold air through unseen cracks. At the chamber entrance, he found Fordham alone, staring into the darkness. "If they come," Cooper asked quietly, "how long will we have before they seal it?" Fordham didn't turn. "Less than an hour. Once the doors close, they never open again." The doctor stood in silence, listening to the drip of water, the hum of the generator, the heartbeat of stone. For the first time, he wondered whether the rock would remember them, or whether, when the war was over, their bones would simply become part of it. The order came in the middle of a humid afternoon, coded, unsigned, and chillingly brief. Prepare for closure. Axis movement confirmed north of Tangier. Within hours, the tunnels buzzed with life. Engineers moved like ghosts, sealing vents, checking pressure systems, welding frames. The men of Operation Tracer stood in silence as heavy crates were lowered into the cave. Food tins, water barrels, batteries, morphine, a final delivery of books. Fordham read the inventory aloud, like a priest reciting last rites. Cooper noticed his hands trembled only once, when he set down the box marked Personal Effects. By nightfall, the air was thick with heat and diesel. The generator hummed its endless tune, and the smell of welding smoke clung to every surface. Horn sat cross-legged by the radio, fingers tracing the dials, adjusting frequencies that no one would hear. Wilkes inspected the ventilation shaft one last time, muttering about stone that remembers. Each man worked like he was trying to leave a mark on the rock, some proof that he had existed before it swallowed him. The next morning, they were told to assemble. Fordham stood before them, his face drawn, voice hollow. "Gentlemen, from this moment forward, you are the eyes of the Empire. Should the enemy take this rock, you will remain. The hatch will be sealed. The outside world will not know you live. You will observe, you will report, and you will endure until you can endure no longer." He paused. "No one will come for you." The words hung in the damp air like smoke. One by one, the men filed into the chamber. Cooper watched the light from the tunnel fade as the metal door swung closed. The last thing he saw was Fordham's silhouette, motionless, hand raised in a silent salute. Then, darkness. A deep, absolute darkness that pressed against the eyes. The welding began, slow, deliberate, final. Sparks showered down, lighting the cave like a storm of fireflies. The air filled with the sound of steel fusing with stone, of men vanishing from the world. Inside, they stood still. Horn lit the first candle. Its light seemed too small, too fragile. "Well," he said softly, "I suppose that's that." Cooper said nothing. He moved to the radio, tuning it to the harbor frequency. Static filled the cave, their only connection to life beyond the limestone. Above them, the war raged on. Ships came and went. Bombers crossed the skies. But inside the rock, time began to stretch, each second heavy and identical. Days turned to weeks. The air grew stale, the walls damp with condensation. They worked in silence, logging ships, counting supplies, sending coded signals through the rock. Each transmission felt like whispering into a grave. Horn kept a running tally on the wall, one chalk mark per day, until Wilkes told him to stop. "We don't need to count how long we've been dead," he said. Sleep became difficult. The generator throbbed endlessly, the only heartbeat they had left. Cooper's journal grew darker with each entry. Appetite gone, spirits fading. Horn talks to himself at night. "We listen to the sea through the stone. It sounds closer every day." The candlelight flickered as he wrote, distorting the shadows on the wall. For a moment, he thought he saw movement where there was none, as if the rock were shifting around them, closing in. Then, one morning, the radio crackled with a voice, faint, foreign, almost human. Horn froze. The others gathered, their breath held, but the signal wasn't English. It was German. A ship had entered the bay. The invasion had begun. They had become what they were meant to be, ghosts watching from beneath the skin of the earth. Horn grinned weakly. "Well, lads," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "looks like we're finally on duty." And as the echoes of distant engines filled the chamber, the men of Operation Tracer settled into their eternal vigil. 6 shadows entombed in stone, listening to the heartbeat of war above their heads. The sound came first, faint, metallic, impossible. It echoed through the ventilation shaft like a whisper through bone. Horn froze mid-sentence, his pencil trembling over the logbook. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Cooper lifted his head slowly. Another clang, distant but deliberate, like a hammer against steel. For a long moment, they listened in silence. Then came the muffled murmur of voices, German voices, carried down through the narrow cracks of the rock. The invasion had reached Gibraltar. From that moment, everything changed. The men spoke in whispers, walked in socks, extinguished candles at the slightest echo. Above them, boots scraped stone, engines roared, the world vibrated with the rhythm of occupation. Wilkes pressed his ear to the wall and said softly, "They're building up there, bunkers, maybe quarters." Cooper nodded, but said nothing. His heartbeat was louder than the sounds above. Days turned into a blur of darkness and static. The radio picked up fragments, orders, ship calls, occasional Morse from the far Atlantic. Horn tried to decode a transmission and stopped halfway. "They've taken the harbor," he whispered. "They're docking there." Cooper wrote, "Confirmed Axis presence. Observation continues. Morale unsteady." The words felt mechanical, detached from the fear that filled the air. The oxygen scrubbers began to struggle. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, turning the floor slick. The smell of metal and sweat was constant. Wilkes coughed often now. His lungs were used to open air, not this tomb. "You ever think about how it'll end?" he asked one night, his voice echoing too loudly. Horn answered without looking up. "It's already ended. We're just late to the funeral." Then came the day the periscope lens cracked. A single German soldier had climbed near the fissure to place a sensor or wire. His boot struck the disguised outlet, sending a web of fractures through the glass. The team watched in horror as the image blurred into a smear of light. For a moment, Cooper thought the man had seen them, that the rock itself had betrayed their secret. But the soldier simply lit a cigarette and walked away, the ember glowing briefly in the darkness like a dying star. After that, paranoia crept in. The men began hearing things that weren't there, footsteps, knocks, breathing in the tunnels. Horn swore he heard a voice calling his name through the radio static. "Bruce," he whispered one night, shaking Cooper awake. "It said your name." Cooper stared at him, eyes hollow. "You're exhausted," he said softly. "We all are." Weeks passed. The supplies dwindled faster than expected. Rats had chewed through a bag of grain. The water filters began to fail. The constant humidity made their clothes rot, their boots swell. But they still logged every movement they could. Ships entering and leaving the harbor, soldiers marching, vehicles rumbling through the night. It was as if writing it down gave meaning to their slow decay. Then, one night, the cave shook violently, a deep, rolling thunder that cracked dust from the ceiling. "Depth charges," Wilkes gasped. "They're testing the harbor defenses." The lights flickered. The generator groaned, then fell silent. Darkness swallowed them whole. For the first time, the hum that had filled their ears since the ceiling was gone, replaced by something far worse. Silence. Hours passed. They worked by candlelight, sweating as they rewired. Circuits prayed over fuses. When the generator finally sputtered back to life, Cooper slumped against the wall, his face gray. "We're living inside a corpse," he murmured, "and we're the ghosts that refuse to leave." Horn didn't answer. He was staring at the wall opposite him, at the chalk tally marks he'd stopped making weeks ago. Slowly, he picked up the stub of a pencil and began again. But this time, he didn't mark days. He drew a small square, a door, and beneath it, one word: open. And as he set the pencil down, they all felt it, the slow, steady drip of seawater finding its way through the cracks. The rock, their fortress and tomb, was beginning to remember the sea. The water kept coming. First a trickle, then a rhythm, the sea tapping at the edges of their world. Wilkes tried sealing the cracks with rags and resin, but the stone was sweating faster than he could work. "It's the tide," he whispered. "The rock's breathing us out." The others said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The food was nearly gone. The generator faltered every few hours. The candles melted into one another, a single pool of trembling light. They still recorded ship movements, even when there were none, habit masquerading as hope. Horn began logging their dreams, each one more fractured than the last. Cooper's handwriting had grown smaller, tighter, until it was barely legible. Then came the transmission, a faint pulse, rhythmic, almost like Morse. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long. SOS. The men froze. "It's not us," Horn breathed. "It's coming through the rock." The sound repeated, fading in and out like the heartbeat of something buried deep. Cooper leaned over the radio, his face ghostly in the dim light. "It's reflection," he said softly. "Ours, bouncing back. We've been calling into stone." No one spoke after that. Hours passed like lifetimes. The air grew thin. The morphine box was opened. Wilkes refused his dose, muttering about seeing daylight again. Horn stared at the periscope, the cracked lens showing only blackness. "Maybe," he whispered, "they've already won. Maybe the war's over and we're still down here, waiting to be told." Cooper smiled weakly. "Then let's make sure the record shows we did our duty." He reached for his logbook and wrote the final entry in slow, steady lines. "Observation complete. No further movement. Mission maintained. End." The generator stuttered one last time before dying. Silence swallowed them whole. They sat together, 6 shadows pressed against the heart of the rock, listening to the sea rising around them. Horn whispered a prayer, or maybe a song. No one could tell. The candle guttered, then went out. Decades later, in 1997, a team of explorers stumbled upon a sealed chamber hidden behind a false wall in Gibraltar's tunnels. The air inside was stale but dry, the furniture intact, the journals gone. On the stone wall above a rusted radio were faint chalk markings, not words, just a square with a single line drawn through it. Some believed it marked the periscope's view. Others said it was a door. No human remains were found. Official records never confirmed if Operation Tracer was ever activated, or if the men were truly sealed within the rock. Some claim the mission was cancelled before the invasion that never came. Others say the British government buried the truth, that the volunteers were entombed quietly, their signals lost beneath the noise of war. But among the locals of Gibraltar, there's still a story whispered by the engineers who work the night shifts deep in the tunnels. Sometimes, when the air is still and the sea pounds hard against the cliffs, they swear they hear a faint tapping from inside the stone. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long. And somewhere beneath that ancient rock, the ghosts of 6 forgotten men still keep watch.